Good afternoon. So I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to present this session. Maybe next time, Mohamed, you can change, because we are always starting with biology, and maybe next time we can start with, I don't know, immunology or elderly patient or CAR T cells. Okay, so the organizers asked me to make an update about cytogenetics and genetics. So I think that at least in many European countries and outside of US, I think that next generation sequencing is not yet here. And the gold standard for me is still interface fluorescence in situ hybridization. Of course, the sorting of plasma cells is mandatory, and we still see some labs who are just performing FISH on the total bone marrow, which is totally crazy. And to me, I think that the most important abnormality we have to look for are the 17p deletion, the 1p32 deletion, 1q gain, translocation 414. And but again, we know that in the GMWG high-risk definition, we don't have the 1p, we have 17p, we have 1q and 414. And we decided in IFM to try to revisit the performance of all these abnormalities in predicting patient outcome. And so we did analyze quite a big number of patients for training and then for confirmation. And using SNP array, we were able to look at all the chromosomal abnormalities, and we came up with 6 abnormalities. One is associated with good prognosis, which is trisomy 5, and all the other are associated with poor outcome, trisomy 21, 414, 1q gain, deletion 1p, and deletion 17p. And so we did propose an algorithm, and so you just take this number and you add plus, plus, plus. So for example, and we stratified the patient with patients with a score lower than or equal to 0, so meaning patients with no high-risk abnormality or with trisomy 5. And you can see it is a blue curve at the top. The intermediate risk is between 0 and 1, and the high risk is more than 1. And you can see that, for example, 17p deletion, all these patients are in the high-risk category. In contrast, if you are taking the 414 translocation patients, the score is only 0.4. This means that not all these patients are really high risk. And so I think that in the future, we will have to revisit our definition of high risk, because you can see that in all the trials, pharma or academic, you can see that patients are still defined like this. And I'm really convinced now that not all the patients with 414 are really high risk. And so we did validate this model in an external cohort, and we confirmed that. So, of course, it has been built in patients treated 10 years ago, because we wanted to have a long follow-up to try to identify good risk feature, and to find good risk, you need to have follow-up. But definitely, I think we should try to look at these abnormalities nowadays in ongoing trials with novel drugs. So to conclude this first part on FISH, so 414 alone is not anymore a high-risk feature, and so we need to revisit the GMWG. Again, 1416 is included in the GMWG with a very, very low demonstration of the prognostic impact. It is really rare, 3% of the patients, and so you need to have thousands of patients to be able to confirm the prognostic value of the 1416. And then 1q gain and deletion 1p, we need to have more data to try to validate these two abnormalities for the future. So the question now is, okay, FISH is good. Could or should we switch to next generation sequencing, and especially targeted next generation sequencing? So if we just looked at the number of mutations we see in myeloma, myeloma is just in the middle. So here you have the leukemias with very low number of mutations. Here you have melanoma, lung cancer, carcinogen-induced tumor with a very high number of mutations. And so myeloma is just in the middle. It could have some consequences for the future when we will go, or if we will go to immune therapy, and especially to checkpoint inhibitors. More than 1,000 patients have been exome sequenced, and if we try to categorize these patients, we can see that about half of the patients have either a KRAS or NRAS mutation. And after, you can see that all the other mutations are very rare, 11% for D3 and FAM46C, 8% for TP53 mutation, BRAF in 6%, and after it's very low. So again, myeloma is very heterogeneous, and it is very difficult to try to propose a classification based on these abnormalities. So in the future, probably we need more data, but again, we have more than 1,000 patients already sequenced. It has been shown that all the most frequent abnormalities have no prognostic impact. The only one with high risk is TP53 mutations, usually observed in patients with 17p deletion. And the other are very rare. So maybe we will identify very rare mutation with a good or poor prognosis. But again, I'm not sure it will be very useful. So to try to use these informations for the prognostic assessment of patients, we did develop with our colleague Nikhil Munshi in Boston a targeted exome panel. And we did select 250 genes recurrently mutated in myeloma. We selected also almost 2,500 SNPs to assess the copy number, and especially the 17p, 1p, 1q, and trisomy. And we did select the all IGH sequences to be able to identify all the translocation, the 414, 1416, 1420, 1114, 814, etc. And so we did use that. And so, for example, we have this kind of cartoon. So you have all the chromosomes here, and this patient, you have a typical translocation between chromosome 4 and chromosome 14, with here, for example, a BRAF mutation. Another patient here with a translocation 1114 with a WANX1 mutation. Another one with 1416, and a subclonal mutation of MMSET here, for example. And here you have another patient. So the external circle here is at diagnosis, and internal circle it is for relapse. At diagnosis, this patient was good risk because of trisomy 3, especially 5, 9, 11, 19, no other abnormalities. And at the time of relapse, what we did observe is deletion of 17p plus mutation of TP53. So this patient who was good risk at diagnosis is becoming ultra high risk at the time of relapse. So I think it is important to perform genetics at diagnosis, but also at the time, at least, of first relapse. So for the future, I think that targeted exome sequencing will be the standard of care for many patients, at least in Europe and US, Canada, because it is still a little bit expensive. Will it be useful to try to select patients for targeted therapy? Except of the mutation of BRAF, I'm not totally convinced that the other KRAS, NRAS mutation are really druggable. And all the other kind of sequencing, meaning all genome sequencing, all exome sequencing, RNA sequencing, I think it is more for research, but we need to use that to try to understand a little bit more the genetics of myeloma. And this is my last slide. I stop here. Thank you.